Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, evening, whatever your time zone is. I want to welcome everybody. This is the our August meeting of the koha-US acquisitions special interest group. We're gonna each month we spend some time talking about the state, the things that are coming up in acquisitions and the bumps that we run into, and kind of sharing ideas on how to address all the any problems and share cool tips and tricks that we've learned through the through working with this. I see lots of people that we saw last week at Round Rock at the conference. That was a great time had by all. Hopefully. Today we have two special speakers as promised at the conference. Jonathan and Matt from, I always have to slow down, PTFS Europe.
Get your tongue around it.
Yeah. Who are working on acquisitions 2.0, and they were going to just share some of the things that they've been working on there with that. And I don't know if you guys want to introduce yourselves further, what your roles are in your
Sure.
job and all
I'll
that.
perhaps share my screen.
Okay.
Wait a minute. I shared the right one. Are you seeing my acquisitions 2.0?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes. So yeah, welcome everyone. I was watching the videos actually from last week from the koha-US conference. Looked great fun. So yeah, sad not to be there. But I'm Jonathan Field. I'm actually one of the founders of PTFS Europe. So I started the company in 2007, and Matt Blenkinsop is one of our software engineers, and he's currently looking at acquisitions 2.0. Before that, he was doing a lot of work on the koha ERM, particularly all that usage statistics and the platforms that was introduced in the last release. So that's all of his fantastic work. So the way we were going to structure it between the two of us is I'll perhaps just talk a little bit about how we got here and some of the things we're hoping to do and sort of what the plan is going forward. So I've got a few slides to talk about that, and then once I've done that, Matt will fire up his koha instance, and we'll actually have a look at the work that's been done to date. So we had a bit of a flurry of activity back in the spring, just around the time of sort of the Koha Hackfest in Marseille. And then things have dried up slightly just because of other projects going on. But we're actually back on it again now, so that's great. So I'll talk a bit about where we're getting to with that. So yeah, so how this all started really. I guess we had it really originated from PTFS Europe and Bywater Solutions talking to each other about various requests we'd had from our partner libraries related to enhancements they wanted to the acquisitions modules. And some of those were looking quite difficult to incorporate under the existing architecture of the current acquisitions module in koha. So that was sort of followed up by some of our a couple of actually our university libraries in the UK who wanted to sponsor us to do some development work in this area. And at the same time, Bywater also had some partners who were willing to sort of sponsor some work to improve it. I guess there's probably maybe in the room here some general frustration with the existing acquisition module and the limitations of that. I think that was very much felt by us as an organisation and by Water as an organisation. So we kind of felt that maybe it was a time to just revisit what's there, at the minute, and what possibly we could do to breathe some new life into the acquisitions module. So the approach we took, I mean, acquisitions, it's huge as a module, and obviously it's widely used by all yourselves and thousands of libraries worldwide. So the first thing we didn't want to do is go charging in and start breaking things. So from that point of view, we decided that we'd actually build Acquisitions 2.0 as a Koha plugin. And the benefits of that is we wouldn't break anything in the existing code because we'd be working totally outside of the current acquisitions code. It also allows us to work iteratively by adding functionality as we go and testing it and revisiting it. People who got an interest in acquisitions could potentially take the plugin and test it on a test server, maybe, and play with it without actually, even on a sandbox, play with that without actually breaking acquisitions, the original acquisitions 1.0. And it also means, from a development point of view, we can actually work faster once we sort of get coding on it by not having to sort of keep pushing code through the community QA process at this point. And I say at this point because assuming everyone loves what they see, and eventually we hope they will do that, then the intention is that we will go back and merge the code back into the core Koha product and somehow allow it to become the sort of default acquisitions module in sometime in the future. So that's sort of the plan, and obviously at that point, all the development that's been done will go through the regular QA process, community QA process. We're doing a couple of things along the way as part of this. So Matt's writing test cases as he goes for each of the individual components. So that's a core requirement of the QA anyway. So we felt rather than just rush the job, we might as well do that now whilst we've got our hands on the code. And Matt has also been doing some work on enhancing the plugin system generally, and in particular to better support translation as well, which is obviously important to libraries who are not using the default English. The code itself is all built on the new Vue.js framework, which is part of Koha now, which we originally introduced at 2211, I think, when we introduced the ERM system. So all of that is written in Vue. So that's all built around the same framework as well. So that's again the approach. So in terms of what would be in it, first thing is we want to build in library groups from the get-go so that every table within the system has the ability to use library groups. So that's obviously hugely important for libraries who are working in any sort of consortia environment. We're adding the ability to turn on and off certain elements. So we have some libraries who perhaps use ordering, but they actually don't bother using invoicing because it happens outside of Koha in some corporate, finance systems. So potentially there's the option there to turn bits on and off. One thing we want to look at as well is the one thing we really don't like right now about the acquisitions homepage is it feels very illogical and slightly confusing and shows you things that perhaps you shouldn't see. So we want to try and work towards a dashboard which will have more useful information and potentially be widgetized as well, where you could choose what goes on that dashboard. So potentially with charts and other useful tables of information. We want to build more granular permissions than the existing acquisitions permissions. So particularly, big requirement that we have, particularly in the UK, is for fraud purposes, is the person who creates the invoice is not allowed to pay it. So that's a sort of important requirement. So it's building those sort of permissions in to make it a bit more robust. We're rethinking, and this is actually the point we're kind of at right now. We're rethinking the way that orders are put together. So there's a lot of interest in sort of using order lists or selection lists, whatever you want to call them, and putting things onto order lists and building orders potentially from order lists. Generally better support for continuous orders, so that's standing orders, subscription orders, which are sort of poorly handled right now in the current acquisitions. Another big frustration, splitting receipting from invoicing. So right now it kind of happens in the same process, which doesn't always make sense, because the invoice and the box don't always come at the same time, of course. So that's an important factor. We want to make better use of additional fields, and you might have again noticed there's been some work going on in ERM to add additional fields to some of the components of ERM, and I think we'll generally see this extend in koha generally. I think it'll probably get to the point where you could use additional fields in every part of the system to add more information. So we want to make extensive use of additional fields, because sometimes there's just information you want to add that's maybe local to you for a specific purpose. We obviously need to continue to support MARC ordering, and also particularly in Europe, EDIFACT ordering as well. So that's something we've got to build in. So that needs a bit of thought. And because we're now handling electronic resources through the ERM module, we need better handling of the purchase and ordering of those e-resources. So again, that's something that's becoming a more important requirement, to be able to order an electronic subscription or things like that, and to be able to record that through acquisitions, but also to be able to make it visible from the ERM. Streamlining terminology, that's really more things moving away from terminology such as baskets, so more common terminology, I guess, like orders and order lines. Potentially even think about, vendors with adding e-resources. We're sort of extending who vendors potentially are. They're not sort of book jobbers as we might have thought of them in the past. They could potentially be publishers or aggregators, all sorts of people. So maybe streamline the terminology there. And see if there are opportunities to better support modern accounting software and practices. So this is probably something that will come at the back end, but it's something that we're sort of keeping an eye on. So again, you probably won't be familiar with PEPL, because I think it's very much a European standard, but PEPL is really the ability to pass invoices between systems in a defined electronic format that's sort of defined by European standard. So it's seeing if there's opportunities like that where we could sort of make integration smoother, I guess. In terms of actually deploying it, we're trying to take a similar approach to the way we built ERM, in as much as we've taken on the bulk of the development of it, and we'll almost certainly sort of drag some other people into this in terms of development as we go. But at the minute, we're trying to sort of build out a minimal viable product for people to test and play with. And as we have done with ERM, you'll have noticed, if you follow Bugzilla, there's been a sort of flurry of sort of new bugs where people have said, I love ERM, but it would be really great actually as well if we could have this. So we kind of anticipate that that's what's going to happen, that we'll have a sort of core acquisitions 2.0, and there'll be a flurry of people wanting little nips and tucks here and there. At the minute, we've got a Kanban board to document the ideas that we're really actually using to capture ideas at the minute, and I'll talk about sort of feedback a little bit in just a moment. But before I get to that, I'll talk about sort of the order of work we're doing at the minute. So funds is largely done, and that's really the bulk of what Matt's going to show you in a moment. Matt's at the minute moving on to vendors, but we're actually, this probably would be a fairly simple piece of work because we're largely leaving the vendors alone, because vendors really, it's very sort of flat information, if you like. They kind of are what they are. So we don't feel a big requirement to shake up vendors entirely, but we have got a list of nice to haves, just things that we'd like to improve in that area, and I'll show you that sort of list of what we're intending to do there in a minute. So we're hoping this next bit will get done pretty quickly, maybe even this side of Kirkon in Montreal. And then we're moving on to the big beast of the purchase orders. So we've been doing some work over the last few weeks on sort of finalizing what we're going to do with that. And importantly, I think that will include those standing and subscriptions, continuous orders, to better handle those. And then after that, we'll move on to the other bits, so the receipting of orders, and then separately, the invoicing of orders as well. And we've also, along the way, we've got some ERM sort of hooks we want to places where we want to hook acquisitions and ERM together. So there are some things that will probably happen anyway because of the timeline of this, because it's going to take us a while to get through this. I've already seen bugs, and I know there are some bugs that have been worked on to add some enhancements to the acquisitions ERM linking. So those will probably come in anyhow, I think, as part of the current acquisitions and ERM. But we've got some things we want to include in the work we're doing as well. So yeah, particularly about vendors, as I say, we're really going to leave vendors as they are right now. So no dramatic changes. The table structures and everything will largely be the same. But what we're planning to do is make it in the sort of acquisitions 2.0 acquisition screens, if you like. We're going to take the existing vendors and integrate them, hopefully, into a better user interface. Make it easier to filter those, maybe even browse them by A to Z. And then the things we're going to add, and these bits of functionality will apply to acquisitions, the existing acquisitions, because essentially it's core code, and that's the ability to add library grouping. That's just to get library grouping everywhere. Again, additional fields, because we love additional fields, just adding more stuff. To be able to record vendor payment methods, potentially add some more grace, date periods, so subscription grace periods, order grace periods, that sort of thing. Link up the vendors to data providers in the ERM. Be able to identify the language of a vendor where you might be dealing with vendors across borders. And be able to look at agreements and licenses if a vendor is in the ERM is linked to an agreement or license, and vice versa. Be able to look from agreements and licenses to see the vendor. So both ways. So that's a little bit of piece of work that sort of Matt's working on, or just started to work on now, to just sort of sort out some of these things. So hopefully not too much. We think there's loads of opportunities as part of this work, and the sort of opportunities we've identified is the ability to potentially add task management into this, or workflow management, whatever you want to call it. So Matt will show you in a minute the small piece of work we've done in that area as part of funds and yeah, the funds module. But we think there's potential opportunities to widen this out in Koha more broadly. So in acquisitions, it's obviously things like you know, the person who approves the budget is not necessarily the person who sets up the fund record. There may be different people. So the workflow might be that if first of all, a task is allocated to the senior librarian to approve the budget, and then they pass it on to somebody else to create the fund, and somebody else activates the fund. It's that sort of thing is what we're thinking about. But I think, you know, when you move it into module like cataloging, you've potentially got the opportunity to have workflows there as well. So things like, you know, you've created a fast catalog record to issue a book where you can't find a record for it, and you want to create a task to catalog it properly when it comes back in. So I think there's multiple uses across the system. So maybe it's useful, maybe will be useful in different areas as we go. Yeah, ability to compare vendor prices and performance without leaving Koha. So that's really integration with other services. Vendor order templates, so you don't have to keep creating, you know, where you have common sort of ordering patterns. So you always order 2 copies for this branch or 1 copy for that branch and 3 copies for this branch. It's to create a template you can just apply to an order straight away that automatically lays out the order for you. So that's, I think would be a really nice enhancement. Ability to split the orders between multiple funds. I'm sure some of you would love that. That's really where you can actually split the cost of an individual item across multiple funds. Title independent orders. So that is really the ability to order other stuff other than just books and e-resources. So potentially to order all sorts of stuff for the library, stationery, notepads, whatever you want, but things that don't necessarily have to have a catalog record. So right now you can sort of do it. It's very kludgy because you have to create a sort of brief catalog record for a pencil or something like that, and it's not great. So to sort of break the link really between the catalog record and the order. Potentially add acquisitions anywhere where there's a template really to notice the slips. So things like the purchase order, so that just to give the libraries more control over the layout of a purchase order, what it looks like. And then consider how we better integrate with providers of MARC records. So particularly, you know, in EDI workflow, where you might get a very basic order catalog record from a supplier, and then at a later date they provide a full MARC record to overlay to better handle that overlaying of MARC data. So in the UK we have a big supplier called BDS, and I know there's people like Baker and Taylor as well around who do that sort of service. So there's that. Credit notes, properly handle credit notes, I think is a big one. So that's important to us. Yeah, vendor APIs potentially as well. So there's some potential opportunity for vendors where we might want to go out to their sites, or vendors who might want to push data into Koha. And you sort of see that with Gobi right now. So I think there's potentially other opportunities there as well. Ability to archive funds and vendors better to avoid clutter on the screen. Ability to better handle currency. Again, probably not a big concern of libraries so much in the US, but we have you know, we have some of the libraries that we work. They have offices in, you know, right around the world, in Germany, the UK, China, all over the place, and they want to be able to better handle what the native currency is. So obviously, right now everything gets translated back into your native currency. And in the example that I gave, the native currency, really, your default native currency is wherever you are. So in Germany, you want it to be the euro. In the UK, you want it to be the pound sterling, and so on. So take a look at that. They've probably developed a proper glossary of the language, so we all know, so we're all using the same language and we actually know what it means. So that's more of a documentation type thing, I guess. In terms of migration, we haven't talked a lot about this in detail at the minute. I think there's two approaches. The easy approach, of course, is to run down acquisitions one, the startup, which is the sort of thing a lot of libraries do when they migrate from one legacy system to Koha or another system. So that's the easy option. It's almost certainly we'll have to tackle the hard option, which is actually to migrate the data properly at some point. So that actually does need a bit more thinking about how we do that. And we won't really know more about that until we get into the nuts and bolts of the sort of ordering, how it's going to work. So we're looking for feedbacks. We welcome feedback. We've been talking about the best way to solicit the feedback and capture it. We haven't sort of got a very formalized process at the minute. So you're very welcome to email me if you want to, or obviously you can email the lovely Jessie at Bywater, who you all know, and she will consolidate it and share back with me. But longer term, we're talking here about what's the best sort of forum to actually capture other stuff. So we have got this Kanban board at the minute, which we may open up, or we may move it onto Mattermost, or it could be something else. But certainly in the short term, if you've got thoughts, and there's bound to be duplication because we're already getting duplication from the small bits of sort of small requests that I've had. People are basically asking for the same, everybody wants the same sort of things really. But yeah, send it to me or Jessie, that's absolutely fine. So that's sort of the background. So you're very welcome to ask me any questions, but otherwise I'll hand over to Matt to actually show some of the work we've been doing to date.
Does anybody have any questions at this point? I'm just curious to see what Matt will show us. So Matt, go ahead.
Okay, hit it, Matt.
I was just trying to find the mute button after sharing my screen. Hi, everyone, and thanks, Jonathan, for just walking through that. I think I'll refer back to a few things Jonathan said as we go through, but I think he's covered quite a lot of the points, so this will be more of a show and tell rather than a really detailed demonstration and overview. One thing to note that Jonathan did say is that because we're building this as a plugin, one of the benefits is that we're not meddling with too much of the core code and potentially breaking things. The problem is that the reverse applies, which that when we change things in core, it can break things in the plugin, which is what happened this morning when I fired it up again. So I think I've ironed everything out, but if there's a warning red error message at some point, that might be why. But we can talk through, and we've got lots of screenshots of the different parts of the module if anything does go wrong. So the homepage hasn't changed in terms of how we get into the module. The existing button just now redirects to the new module once you've installed the plugin. So as we've said, it just installs like any other plugin, and then it will redirect you to the new module just using the normal button. We talked, or Jonathan mentioned, about how we would be able to turn the modules on and off. So at the moment, you'll see that there's no real sort of list of options in the left-hand menu here. This is because at the moment, this is a fresh install, if you like. So we've not switched any of the modules on. Funds and ledgers is the only module that we've worked on so far, obviously, at the moment. But as we add more modules in, the list will start to grow, and you'll have a more dynamic list on the left here, depending on what you've switched on and off, sorry. The homepage as well, obviously, will develop into sort of the dashboard thing that Jonathan's mentioned, because at the moment that is sort of being left towards the end on the basis that until we know exactly which bits of each module are going to be there and possibly able to be represented in the dashboard. We won't push too much on this area yet, and we'll sort of finish that off at the end based on what we've written into this and also any feedback and desires that people have through the process as we go. So if I now come into settings, you've got your general settings. We've got one for tasks at the moment, and we've also got an area where we'll put a manual into this, because obviously this module being a plugin, we won't be adding anything into the existing koha manual. We would write this all into the plugin itself. And then at any point in the future, we did decide to merge into core, we've got a ready-made manual that we can sort of almost copy and paste into the existing koha manual. But it does mean that if you do install the plugin, you've got access to all of that information directly. You don't need to come and find a particular repository or something that's holding that data in it. So at the moment, we've only got the one general setting, which is pretty much just switching the module, choosing which modules to display. So if I add the funds and ledgers module, you can now see I've got a settings option for that as well, because it's enabled, and it's also now visible in the left-hand menu. So as we add more modules into this, ordering, invoicing, etc., they'll all sit within that same drop-down, and the same functionality will apply. Depending on which modules you actually want to have active, that's what will be visible within this. So coming into the funds and ledgers module then, you can see across the top, we've got a range of different options or sort of, I guess, entities that exist within the module. And there's a pretty sort of comprehensive filtering display system to enable you to find things. So I think that was based a little bit on the idea that the existing module can be quite difficult to navigate at points and find different things that you're looking for. So we were aiming to have a bit more of a functional filtering and search system on the homepage that you could use to try and quickly navigate to various things. Just to quickly talk through the structure of how we've actually set things out. So you can see we've got, I think this is now called a fiscal period instead of a fiscal year, but the idea behind it is that you've got your top level fiscal period, and you can have multiple fiscal periods for different things. It could be an academic year, a financial year, or a calendar year, for example. And then within each fiscal period, you've got various ledgers, and each ledger then will have funds. And what we didn't actually have on this is we now actually support sub-funds as well. So you can split funds further and break them down into sub-funds. So that's what you can see reflected here along the top. You've got your fiscal periods, your ledgers, your funds. We also have something called fund groups, which is to say that if, for example, you had a couple of fiscal years assigned, obviously all the ledgers are only applicable within that fiscal year, and the funds as well within the different ledgers. So if you, for example, wanted to track what your spending was on e-resources as a collection across all of your fiscal years and ledgers, you'd be able to create a fund group called e-resources and assign different funds from different ledgers and fiscal years to that. So you'd then be able to get an overview that way of the grouping of that particular set of funds, even though they exist as entities within different fiscal years and ledgers. So one of the key things we've talked about as well is library groups. So I've set up some imaginatively named library groups here. And what we've added is a flag on library groups now, which is to show that it's used within the acquisitions module. And the idea here is that everything is filtered for the user based on the branch that they are logged into. So I'm logged here into a branch called Centerville. And you can see from the library groups that branch appears in most of the subgroups and groups. But if I were to now log in as the same user into, I'll do it in this window, so I've got the module open. If I were to log into this library Troy and then come back into the module, I've now got a more limited subset of modules visible to me because that's the branch that I'm now logged into. So even though this user is a super librarian, it's still branch specific. They don't necessarily have access to everything. It's fully dependent on which branch you're actually logged into. I'll just come back into the main branch so that we've got all of the data available. So a fiscal period, I've set up a few example ones here. So financial years, calendar years, and you can add new periods through quite a simple form. You can set who actually owns the that fiscal year, so that would then link. I'll have a quick look at the tasks module towards the end, but in terms of the workflow, you would be able to identify then who the owner of this is. So that if there's a specific task or workflow item that you want completing on a certain ledger or fiscal period, you'd be able to see who actually owns that, and you could either assign it to them, or if they're the ones that have created something and we don't want them to be able to complete the next workflow, such as invoicing and then paying the invoice, you'd be able to, you know, block that from happening because we know who owns that particular thing. And this as well is the visibility of which library groups we want this to be applicable to. So whatever we set within here will then work on the filtering that I just briefly displayed. Ledgers is very similar again. This time you've got your list. You can see how many funds are linked to each ledger and sort of a top level value. You can enter again via a form, which again is sort of similar. You assign it to a fiscal period. You can select your currency because obviously we're going to try and make currency a bit more of a focus within this module. And again, you can set your owners and which library groups it will be visible to. So here, this is grayed out because it will only allow us to set the user depending on which library groups they've got, or which, fiscal year I think we need to set. There we go. So because that fiscal year has library group visibility already associated with it, we can only set this ledger to be visible to the same library groups. We can't add in another random library group that this fiscal year isn't applicable to. So this will be an abbreviated list based on what is applied to this one. And then we've got some limits that we can set on the ledgers. At the moment, there's not too much logic behind these because we haven't yet moved into the actual ordering process. But once we move into that stage, that will be a lot more around tracking where you are against the spend, what limits you're allowed on different ledgers. But as I say, that's not too heavily linked to anything yet because it's just the base data that we've set up at the moment for the ledgers. When you click into actually have a look at the ledger, you'll get a sort of financial overview. Again, a lot of these fields aren't doing too much yet because we don't have the spend data set up or any ordering processes. But as we develop that, these will start to reflect what's actually going on against that ledger in terms of spend and ordering. And then you also get a table at the bottom to show which funds are actually associated with that and what value sits against them. Similarly with funds, similar to ledgers, you get your top level value for the fund itself. You can add new funds similar to what we've seen before. But when you then come into a fund itself, the layout is very similar to the ledgers, but at the bottom here, we actually have the allocations that you've made. So you've got a trackable history of what's been done against each particular fund. So any spend, once we get on to ordering, will actually be reflected here as well. You'll be able to see which order number that will either sit in the reference or the note column has spent against this particular fund. And yeah, it's just going to give you a much more visible history of what's actually being done against each fund. So just to try and demonstrate that, if we add another 100 to this and we just put a test reference against that, we'll now see another allocation against this. And potentially what we could look at as well is adding who has actually made the allocations against things so that you can see who has made and when various allocations, and obviously spend as well once we get to that stage. You can also transfer funds. So if I were to transfer from this into this Nature Journals, and if I were to transfer 50 against that, that will now display here with a note to say that we've transferred that over to Nature Journals. And if I can find the Nature Journals one, we'll see the same thing here. So we've now received 50 from this. So you can do this and it will track that history against each one and apply that to both the funds that you've done. And that will also work between sub-funds as well. So once you select a fund, if that fund has sub-funds associated to it, this drop-down will activate and you'll be able to pick which sub-fund then you want to actually apply that to. I think that just about covers us on the funds and ledgers front. I'll just do a quick look at the tasks module. It's very basic at the moment because we're still discussing whether we actually strip it out of here itself and apply it more generally to Koha. But you can see that you would assign tasks to various people. So this is a list of my tasks that I've been given, which is to activate this financial year. And if I look, I had a previous task that I've completed, and then I can also show which tasks I've created. So I've created this for someone else, and they can I can keep track of that to see what's happened, whether it's been completed. But really, this hasn't developed very much beyond the first few stages that we've done, just on the basis that we might actually extract this out and expand it further, like Jonathan mentioned, to start looking at including cataloging and other modules. So this might possibly start to exist at its own standalone thing within core rather than sat within this plugin. I think that brings us to the end of the quick show and tell. So I think we're probably opening the floor back up again for any questions if anyone's got any.
Well, I can say that the acquisitions group has been talking about that fund. We put in a bug in Bugzilla addressing that tracking of changes to funds, you know, transferring and doing all that. So I know we're all happy to see that ability. That really is helpful. Are there any questions? You can interrupt me. I'm just going to keep talking, and then you can just interrupt me. I'll try and keep my eye on the chat stuff too. I just made note of a couple of things that we've talked about in the acquisitions group, and just wanted to see if, you know, it was on you guys' radar, that kind of thing. And the first one is, we use the term a blanket PO. I don't know if that makes sense to you. You know, where it's kind of, you create a PO for, you know, round numbers, $1,000, and then you can spend off of that, kind of like you do with Overdrive. But we have other vendors that would, you do that kind of thing where you just, you think, okay, we're going to spend this much money and we're going to have this PO, and then we're going to just spend down from it. It's kind of like a fund, but it's not, you know.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean. I've seen that used before in libraries that we work with. I don't think we have that on our list, actually. So I'm going to add it just now.
Okay. Something else that, and this is with the EDI stuff. Right now we can order, you know, order things and that all works, but there's no communication with canceled orders. You know, if we use Ingram as a vendor. So if Ingram cancels an order, there isn't an electronic communication that takes place to let us know that, you know, we've got to go onto their site and look at the canceled orders, and then go back into Koha and then manually cancel them. We had that in our previous acquisitions ILS, where there was an electronic communication about canceled orders. So I didn't know if that was something.
So how did they send that electronic communication? Because we have that works for us in the UK, because all of our vendors support EDIFACT, the order response message, ORD, RSP, order response message, and the order response message handles order statuses. So our book vendors in the UK will send an order response message in EDIFACT format, which says out of print, cancelled, and that updates the order line in in koha right now.
Okay.
But is it some other, in the previous system, how did they communicate that? Was that some other format?
I'm talking about stuff that people told me, because when I got here, basically my first job was to migrate us to koha. So I don't have a lot of experience with the previous system, but I was told that was something that they did. Not sure. I thought it was an EDI message of some kind, but I can look into it a little bit more, figure out what's going on there.
Well, if they do, we don't really see Ingrams in the UK, but just a little bit. But if they support Edifact order response message, that's exactly what it does.
Order response message.
Yeah, and the message code is actually ORD RSP. That's the message code in the Edifact standard.
Okay. Man, I can't read my writing. ORD
RSP.
RSP.
And if you look in the vendor, the EDI, whatever it's called, EDI vendor accounts under administration, you'll see there's a checkbox. You have to check it to say, I want to import it.
Okay. Okay. And say that again. Where is that?
So it's under administration. I don't. Can you just nip there, Matt, as you got the screen? Go to administration there, and scroll down the bottom. It'd be down the yeah, it's down the bottom somewhere. I've got this. Move this chat window out of the way. Oh, you probably haven't got Edifact switched on that system, so that's why it'll be. Yeah. Yeah, EDI accounts. So if you just start a new one, you'll see there's a checkbox at the very bottom there. Says order responses and responses enabled. That's the message.
Okay. I will dig into that. Good to know.
I know the way Edifact is handled in the US is slightly different, because I know Bywater have done some enhancements to handle some of the US vendors. So
okay.
May not be like for like.
Okay. I'm gonna, Nick, most of our libraries use a plugin, so it might require updates to our plugins.
Yeah. Okay.
The US vendors tend not to follow the standard quite as strictly as the European ones do, which is why everything is plug-in so that we can customize for it. So as long as we know what they are, they can be added in, and we just kind of need to have that back and forth with the vendor to see what they're sending.
Okay. All right. I'll see. I'll have a chat with Ingram and see what they do. Okay, cool. Does anybody else have questions? I've got a couple more, but I don't want to monopolize.
Can you hear me?
Yep, just speak up.
Okay, I had a question. Jonathan, you had mentioned that we always need to create a record, like a bib record when we order, and you were going to fix that, but I think we've kind of bypassed that. Some of us have just placed a placeholder record, like under a vendor account, and we just process the invoice that way through koha, so it's taken out of our funds. So how are you guys going to organize that differently?
Well, so really, so that you don't even have to have a placeholder record, so that you can have like a free text field that you can write whatever you want to in there. And it doesn't have to be linked to a sort of dummy bibliographic record.
Thank you.
So purchase suggestions are part of the acquisitions module. And right now, if we do a purchase suggestion on an EDI order, we aren't able to connect the purchase suggestion to the order, so the customers don't get the item has been ordered and item has been received messages like you can set up with non-EDI ordering. Is that kind of stuff going to be incorporated as well in the new module?
Well, we want to incorporate, in fact, we talked about this end of last week, we want to incorporate purchase suggestions and pretty much leave purchase suggestions as it is right now. But I don't think we'd considered that scenario. In fact, I think with our Edifact, European Edifact, I think the same would apply. I don't think you can.
Okay.
No, there's no way of associating. I can't think there's a way of associating a purchase suggestion with an order because of the way the workflow starts on the vendor website, because the workflow starts there. I can't think there's a way of doing that either, even in Edifact.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's something if a few libraries got together and put in a bug in
right.
Bugzilla related to that. Just curious about that. And the other one on my list was creating acquisition slips, which I think we can do now with the new connection between templates and reports. We can do that. So that's cool. Okay, we've got just a couple more minutes. Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
I have a question. I tried to put it in the chat, but I might be able to say it out loud more clearly, not in a little tiny window. One thing that we do here is we have funds that we spend money out of, but the funds themselves don't actually hold any allocation. So we have a budget, and when we go to spend that budget, we don't particularly care if we're buying a print book or an ebook or whatever these subfunds are. But we like to track that information. So what we have had in other systems, in our previous system, we had what was called a reporting fund, which kind of functioned like a tag. So you would map it to your vendor EDI, it would come through, but then the money would actually come out of the parent fund instead of coming out of that subfund. And the reason that is helpful is you could actually put your allocation in at your fund level or your budget level, and then not have to worry about, oh, we don't have any money in ebooks. We have to transfer money around so that we can place that order and not go over and get these warnings. So we've solved this right now by just not allocating any money at all. Everything just shows us a negative number, but it would be lovely if there was a way to not have to resort to that. And then we could actually see where we were on the budget in Koha without having to, export it out and do a little bit of math in Excel. So that's just a comment more than a question.
Yeah. No, I did read that. I was trying to process it all. So I think this is we actually had this conversation in Marseille at the Hackfest around this topic, because really it's where you've got, because at the minute you can't if a fund is spent up or has no money in it, you can't spend it. But really what you're trying to do is spend money on potentially where there is no money. It's not that there isn't any money, it's because it's just sort of money. So that is something we did talk about at Hackfest, actually. And I'll just go back because I think it's in the notes. I think it's in the notes that we made, but I will go back and check that about reporting funds. So I think we have actually had that conversation.
Okay. We got time for maybe one more question or comment?
I guess I have a comment because I posted a couple of bugs. Are you, it sounds like that you've been hired to do specific tasks within acquisitions, I'm assuming. And so my question is, are you at all able to look at the bugs in the acquisitions module on Bugzilla and incorporate some of those into what you're doing, or is that out of your scope?
We haven't gone back and swept through everything that's in Bugzilla. That would probably be an absolutely enormous task, I should think, bearing in mind the amount of stuff that's in there. So, like I said, if there's specific things that are on your radar, we're happy to take a look at them. I mean, like I was saying, with the stuff that's in the MARC, you know, the stage MARC record stuff and the overlaying of records, that's something that'll definitely be at the back end. I mean, you could probably already imagine it's an enormous task anyway, just to embark on this. So yeah, I mean, we're happy to have sort of be pointed to specific bugs if you think there's something that would be worth looking at.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the work that you guys are doing. I know acquisitions, like you said at the beginning, it kind of needs a little bit of a refresh and update to accommodate some of the things that some of the libraries are trying to do. So, you know, recognize what a big task that is and appreciate you guys taking that on. I'm, you know, from what I've seen in the funds, that, you know, that looks really great. Excited to see what comes down the road and with the receiving and ordering or invoicing, I guess. Receiving and invoicing would be better words. So yeah, looking forward to it. And if you guys ever would like to get input from US users of acquisitions, we're always here on the third Tuesday of the month at this time. You know, we can, and you can email me or, you know, Jesse or whoever, Jesse can show up here. You know, if we just, you know, give us some questions or things to think about, or, you know, just to give you feedback. We're happy to do that. So yeah, just
sure. Yeah, and perhaps we could also, you know, show you a bit more once we're a bit further down the line of.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Progress once a bit further down the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have, you know, if you get to the point where you've got something you think let's, you know, this is ready for people to look at, you know, email me again and we'll get you back on the schedule. We'll
sure. Happy
to see what's going on. So again, thank you for all the work that you've done so far. It really, I'm happy with that, you know, especially since it incorporates a lot of the things that this group has been asking for in the funds area or whatever module. And then we will, and, you know, as stuff comes up in this group, we can let you know what we're talking about in the future, or Jesse, either one.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great.
Great.
Okay. I think, yeah, we're a minute over. So appreciate everybody's time, and we'll see everybody again next month at the September meeting, which will be the 17th of September at this same time. So hopefully we'll see you all then, and have a great month if we don't talk before then.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Have a good day.
Bye.